This conference will now be recorded.
So in the last session, we have discussed about the trigger syntax, how to create the triggers in Salesforce instance, and upon creating the trigger, what are the various events that we can use. We have discussed, like we have 7 events are available as part of Apex programming: before insert, before update, before delete, after insert, after update, after delete, and after undelete. These are the 7 trigger events are available as part of your Apex programming in order to find the triggers. Now, and along with that, yesterday we have discussed about in the previous session, we have discussed about the concept of trigger context variables also. So what is the trigger context variable and what is the benefit of this trigger context variable also we have discussed in the last session. And then what trigger context variables are available inside your Apex programming we have discussed. Now, let me go in detail of each and every trigger context variable and how can we use this. Now, so basically, trigger context variables are used to identify the current status of the trigger. In order to identify the current status of the trigger. Why? Because is upon preparing the trigger itself, I'm writing the code for the multiple events. That means I'm writing the code for multiple events. Multiple events code I'm writing within a single trigger itself. Okay, within a single trigger itself, I'm writing the multiple events code also inside this. But in this case, how can we indicate to the trigger that this is a piece of code which has to be executed on before insert? This is a piece of code which has to be executed on after insert. Then how can we inform? How can we identify? How can we segregate that piece of code based on the events? For that one, we are going to be using this trigger context variables. By using trigger context variables, we can identify the current status of the trigger. We can identify the current status of the trigger, okay, inside your trigger lifecycle. Now, in this case, what are the various trigger context variables are available, okay, inside your Salesforce instance? Now, let's see. So what are the various trigger context variables are available inside your Apex programming? Now let's see practically one by one. So now here in this case, now let's see. So the first one is trigger dot is insert. So now what exactly is trigger event, trigger context variable indicates? Now let me explain in this case. When coming to the trigger dot is insert, that means what? Now, whenever I'm performing some operation, generally trigger will fire. Now I want to know why the trigger has been fired. Okay, why the trigger has been fired. Now, what the trigger is doing right now. So now here in this case, whether it is about to perform the operation or operation is already performed, then I want to know the current status. I want to know the current status. So in order to know the current status of the trigger, we are using trigger context variable. Now in this case, the first context variable is trigger dot is insert. Okay, trigger dot is insert. Now what this trigger dot is insert context variable will return? It is returning a boolean value. That means true or false. Okay, true or false. Now Let me come to a general scenario so that we can understand more. For example, today, my mother has given a list of grocery items to me to be get purchased from the supermarket. She has given some list of items to me. I have written some note on that particular the paper. So these are the items I want. So I have started to the supermarket, and then I have went to the supermarket. I have entered into the supermarket. I have purchased the items, and then I have made the payment also. I came outside. Just now, immediately I got a call from my home, from my mother. So now she asked me, okay, where are you? I said that just now I'm at that supermarket. She told that, she asked me, so have you purchased the items or not? I said yes. That means what she wants the current status, exact status, because she needs one more item. Because she needs one more item to be get added to the list. But in this case, what happened? In this case, she asked me exactly what you are doing right now. Have you already purchased those items, or you are about to purchase those items here? Now, if you did not enter into the supermarket, so now sometimes I said that, so just now I'm going to be entering into the supermarket. Then she said that, please add this item also, please purchase this item also. Suppose if I said that I'm already done with that, the purchase, and I'm on the way back to, I'm coming back to the home, I'm on the way to the home, then at that time she said that, okay, no problem, okay, come to the home, we can purchase that item in later stages, nothing but tomorrow also. That means what she wants the exact status. Based on that, she will decide. She can able to add one more item, or we can able to purchase that new item in the next time as well. That means what I want to know the current status, exact status, what the trigger is doing right now. Trigger has been fired or not. Trigger has been fired or not. If the trigger is fired, why the trigger has been fired? Because of which event trigger has been fired? Because of which operation trigger has been fired? Trigger has been fired because of the insert operation or not? If yes, then this particular context variable is returning true. That means trigger dot is insert. That means if the trigger has been fired because of an insert operation, it won't bother about that. It may be before or after. Because of inserting the record, trigger has been fired. If the trigger has been fired because of an insert operation, then it is returning true, or else it will return false. Okay, now. So now here in this case, it returns true when the trigger has been because of an insert operation. Else, it returns false. That means in order to know whether the trigger has been fired because of insert operation or not. So for that one here, we are going to be using this context variable trigger dot is insert. That means I want to know whether trigger has been fired because of insert operation or not. Now, it may be before insert, after insert, it won't bother about that. We'll see whether it is before or after by using different context variables. Now, second one. Now, second one is update. That means what? If the trigger has been fired because of an update operation or not, I would like to identify. Okay. If the trigger has been fired because of an update operation or not, I would like to identify. For that one, we are using trigger dot is update. Okay, trigger dot is update. Now, if the trigger has been fired because of an update operation, it returns true, or else it returns false. Now, it returns true if the trigger has been fired because of an update operation. Excuse me. Else, it returns false. Now, the third one. Trigger dot is delete. That means in order to know whether the trigger has been fired because of a delete operation. Now, I want to know whether the trigger has been fired because of a delete operation or not. If the trigger has been fired because of a delete operation, now this trigger context variable returns the value true or else it returns false. It returns true if the trigger has been fired because of a delete operation. Else it returns false. Now the fourth one. Trigger dot is undelete. That means what? If the trigger has been fired because of a undelete operation, you are undeleting this record because of the trigger has been fired. In this case, if you want to identify whether the trigger has been fired because of an undelete operation or not, then we have to use trigger dot is undelete. Now, so in this case, if the trigger has been fired because of an undelete operation, it returns true or else it returns false. It returns true if the trigger has been fired because of an undelete operation. Else it returns false. Else it returns false. So these are four context variables which are used to identify why the trigger has been fired. It has been fired because of insert or update or delete or undelete. Now we have few more context variables here. Trigger dot is before. So what do you mean by trigger dot is before? That means if the trigger has been fired because of an operation which is about to do the operation, which is about to do the operation. Now, if the trigger is about to do the operation over there, that means trigger has been fired. Why? Because of an insert operation. What is that insert event here before insert? That means trigger is about to perform the operation. Okay, trigger is about to perform the operation. Trigger is not yet the perform that operation. Trigger has been fired because of insert. Then what it is doing? It is about to do the operation. Nothing but operation is not yet done. Insertion is not yet done. It is about to insert that record or about to update the record or about to delete the record. So in this case, what happened? If the trigger is about to perform the operation, that means E is before the thing, but the current status of the trigger is trigger has been fired, but it is going to be starting that operation. It is going to be firing that operation. It is going to be performing that operation. So at that time, if the trigger is about to perform the operation, then we are going to be identifying this whether the trigger is doing what. Trigger is about to do the operation or operation is already done. That means is it in before state or after state? We can identify over here. For that one, we are using is before event. Now, this is before trigger context variable. What it will do is trigger dot is before context variable is going to be returning true if the trigger is about to do the operation. Else it returns a false. It returns true if the trigger is about to perform the operation. Perform the operation. Else it returns false. Else it returns false. If the trigger is about to perform the operation, then it is going to be returning that value true, or else it returns false. And then trigger dot is after. Trigger dot is after. So what do you mean by trigger dot is after? Trigger dot is after is a context variable which is used to identify whether the trigger has been done with the operation or not. Okay, whether the trigger has been done with the operation or not. Now, in this case here, trigger dot is after. Basically, trigger is nothing but a class. In this class, this is the variable that we have. Okay, this is the variable that we have. Now here in this case, this variable will be of type, okay, Boolean type. This variable will be of type Boolean variable. Now, in this case, trigger dot is after. That means what? Now this variable, okay, this variable is going to be identifying whether the trigger is already done with the operation. If the trigger has been done with the operation, then it is returning true, or else it returns false. Now, in this case, it returns true if the trigger has been done with the operation. Else, it returns true. Sorry, false. If the trigger has been done with the operation, it is returning true, or else it returns false. Now, so let me give you few more context variables over. Trigger dot is executed. Is also a Boolean type. Trigger dot is executed. There is a context variable over here. Okay, there is a context variable. Now, whenever we are going to be firing some operations, this operation is going to be executing because of what? It is because of a trigger, or because of a Visual Force page, or because of a web service call, or what? In order to know that, we are going to be using trigger dot is executing. That means now currently it is performing the operation. Why it is performing the operation? Because trigger has been fired. Trigger is executing this operation. In order to know, okay, in order to know if the current operation is going to be performing because of a trigger, it is returning the value true, or else it is returning the value false. So whenever we are going to identify whether trigger is currently executing or not, currently trigger is going to be performing the operation or not. So for that one, we are going to be using this trigger dot is executing. It returns true if the trigger is currently performing the operation. Performing the operation. Else, it returns false. That means the current context is a trigger, not a Visual Force page, and not a web service call, and not an asynchronous programming. That means here async effects or execute anonymous window, execute anonymous call. That means here currently the operation is going on. So now the operation is performing by the trigger over here. Okay, the operation is performing by the trigger. Now, in this case, in order to know if the operation is performing, then who is performing that operation? Whether this operation is invoking by the trigger, or the operation has been invoked by the Visual Force page, or the operation is invoking by the web service, or because of an execute anonymous operation over here. I want to know that. For that one, we are using the context variable called as trigger dot is executing. That means if the current operation is happening because of a trigger, to identify that, we are using this trigger dot is executing. Now, so in this case, whenever the trigger is going to performing the operations on those records, okay. Now, whenever the trigger is performing the operations on the record, then how many number of records the trigger has considered? How many number of records are available inside the trigger? I want to know that. So for that one, we are having a property called as size, a variable called as size. So now here in this case, what is the use of this size over here? Now, so in this case, how many number of records are available inside the trigger, we can able to identify. That means in this trigger invocation, how many number of records has been considered, how many number of records are available. The number of records are available inside this trigger invocation, we can identify with the help of trigger dot size variable. By using this trigger dot size, we can identify how many number of records are available, which will be including both the old records and the new records also both. Now, in this case, it returns the number of records has been included in the invocation, which includes both old and the new context records, which includes both old and new context records, which is returning that value called as integer value. It is returning the integer value. Now, the next one more context variable. These are some advanced features, generally not required, but in implementation in entry part of they may be raising these questions. Now one more. The one more is trigger dot operation type. Trigger dot operation type. So what is this trigger dot operation type? Now, when coming to this trigger dot operation type, it is a very old method. Okay, very old method. Generally, nobody will use, but maybe in the entry point of view, or in the some cases, it might be useful to you. That means what kind of operation that we are performing the trigger right now. Trigger is performing what kind of operation over here? It is performing before insert, or before update, or before delete, or after insert, or what? What kind of operation it is? Okay, what kind of operation it is? Now, in this case, here depends upon that. Depends upon that operation type. Okay, depends upon the operation type. We can able to identify what type of operation okay the trigger is performing right now. Why the trigger has been fired? Because of what operation? Whether it is because of which event it has been fired, we can able to identify over here. Based on that, we can able to write the respective logic inside that. Now, so now here in this case, okay, now here in this case. Now the trigger dot operation type is going to be indicating why the trigger has been fired. That means because of which event trigger has been fired, it is going to be returning that value over here. Okay, it is returning that value. Okay, what type of event for which the trigger has been fired, we can identify. Now, so now here in this case, when coming to the trigger dot operation type is a property or a variable which is going to be returning the event name because of which event trigger has been fired. Now, it returns the event name because of which the trigger has been fired. Okay, because of which the trigger has been fired. Because of which event the trigger has been fired, that event name it returns to. Like for example, it is returning the values here. For example, it returns before insert, before update, before delete, and then after insert, after update, after delete, after delete. These are the values to be getting written. Based on this event name, we can able to write the respective business logic by using switch state. Okay, based on this event name only, we can able to write the respective business logic over. If the trigger has been fired, okay, if the trigger has been fired, at that time we can able to identify. If the trigger has been fired because of an insert event, then at that time we can able to use that. Now, in this case, based on this operation type, we can able to use the switch statement. Inside that, we can able to write the business logic. For example, let me explain that. Suppose this is the trigger over here. This is the trigger we have prepared in the last session. So now my trigger is firing over here. For example, these are the events I'm placing inside this. Now, 3 events are available. Accounts trigger on account before insert after update, and then after delete. Now I would like to write that. If you want to write some operations, then in this case we can verify. Now I would like to use that switch statement. Switch on trigger dot operation type. Trigger dot operation type. Okay, trigger dot operation type. So now here is the operation. When if the operation is before insert. Before insert. Then write the business logic. Write the business logic which you want to do in the before insert event. Next. When after update. When after update. Then write the business logic. Write the business logic. No. When after delete. Write the business logic. Write the business logic. Depends upon your requirement. In this case, we can able to write the business logic over. It depends upon that event. Based on that event, whatever the business logic you want to execute, we can able to specify. So now this is my trigger. Now my trigger is going to be firing on 3 events: before insert, and then after update, and then after delete. Okay, now in this case, in the before insert, I want to perform some operations so that we can verify trigger dot operation type. That means what is the current operation? What is the current event? Why the trigger has been fired because of this event or not? So it is collecting the current event name. Based on that event name, it is executing. Suppose here, if the trigger has been fired because of before insert, then it will go to this particular condition, it will be executing this business logic over here. If the trigger has been fired because of after update event, it is going to be executing this business logic. If the trigger has been firing because of after delete, it is going to be executing this piece of business logic. For that reason, we are going to be indicating this. Now, so now here in this case, in order to know why the trigger has been fired, if you want to know the current event name of the trigger, then we are going to using trigger dot operation type. Basically, this is the old methodology. Okay, this is the old methodology, so which has been given by the Salesforce. But now this is also useful. We can able to write in this manner. Also depends upon your requirement. Now, let me give you some more functionalities here. Another manner here. Now we can able to write these functionalities in the same manner here. The same code, if you want to write in a different manner, let me explain. Because sometimes in the entry point after they will raise a question. So what is the trigger dot operation type? Okay, property. What is the use? Trigger dot operation type is a property which is used to identify what is the current event of the trigger. That means why the trigger has been fired. Because of which event trigger has been fired, we can able to collect the trigger event name, okay, in the form of a standard values. That means in the form of enumeration. So now here in this enumeration, these are the values are available here. These are the values are available. Okay, before insert, before update, before delete, and these are the constant values here, which is going to be returning by Salesforce. So this is the event names here. So that based on this event, if you want to execute some business logic, then we can able to write inside that. This is the way we can able to use the trigger dot operation type. Or else, suppose if you are feeling difficulty to use this one, then we can able to write in another manner also. Let me explain over here. Another manner. For example, the same functionalities I would like to write. Look at the same functionalities I would like to write. I'm preparing the trigger. I'm preparing the trigger. I want to write the business logic. Like before insert, I want to execute some business logic. After update, I want to execute some business logic. After delete, I want to execute some business logic. How can we write this one? How can we implement this business logic? So for that one here, whenever if you want to execute the business logic, first of all, we have to know why the trigger has been fired, because of which event trigger has been fired. I want to know. Based on that, I would like to execute that respective business logic also in this case. Now, so in this case, what needs to be done over here? So for that reason, we are going to identify what is the current context of the trigger I want to know. Now, in order to know, I want to execute some piece of code or before insert. Okay, before insert. Then how do we know trigger has been fired because of before insert or not? For that one, I want to identify. I'm using this normal context variable. I don't want to use this operation type. Then how can we use this one? In this case, I would like to use trigger dot is insert. Trigger dot is insert. That means trigger has been fired because of insert operation or not. The two, if the trigger is about to perform the operation or not, nothing but is before. I would like to verify. And trigger dot is before. Is before. That means if the trigger has been fired because of a before insert operation, because of before insert event, then we can write the business logic. Write the business logic. Next. So now after updating the record also, I want to perform some operation. So I want to verify if the trigger has been fired because of the after update event. So I want to verify if the trigger dot is after and trigger dot is update. That means if it is after update event at that time, I am going to execute this business logic. Write the business logic. Next, after delete, if trigger dot is after and trigger dot is delete. If the trigger has been fired because of after delete event are, then I would like to perform some operation. Sorry. This is before delete. Write the business logic. Because we're having before delete. Like that, we can specify this here, our operation. So now, in this case, what happened? Depends upon your event, we are going to be writing the respective business logic here. Previously, in the last session, already we have discussed, whenever we are going to be writing the code, the complete code, that means all the events code we are writing within a single trigger. But in this case, how can we segregate? How can we segregate this piece of code has to be get executed during before insert? This piece of code has to be executed on after insert. How can we inform to the Salesforce? For that one, we are using this trigger context variable. So by using this trigger context variables, we can able to segregate that code to the various small blocks, so that which piece of code has to be executed and what event we can able to decide with the help of trigger context variables. So this is the functionality of trigger context variables. Now let me explain that previous scenario. In the previous session, we have discussed about that trigger context. Now let's see. This is the requirement over here. This is the requirement. Now tell me, how can we write this a piece of code? Now tell me, how can we segregate this piece of code? In the last session, we have discussed about this requirement over there. So here I'm having these two objects are available, lead object and then prospect object. Now both are having some relation. Okay, both are having some relation, where lead is the parent and the prospect is the child, which is having some lookup association from prospect to lead. Now, my requirement is whenever I'm creating the lead record inside this lead object, okay, whenever I'm creating a new lead record inside the lead object, then first of all, I want to make sure inside this lead object, inside this lead record, email field, annual revenue field, and the phone field should be mandatory. For that one, I would like to write some piece of code. That means I want to write some piece of code in order to validate the annual revenue and the phone field, and then the email field is mandatory or not. Nothing but these fields are having the values or not. I would like to cross check that. For that one, I would like to write some business logic. This is the first requirement. As per second requirement, once the lead record has been created successfully inside my lead object, immediately I would like to copy this lead record into my prospect object. So that means with the same details, I want to create a prospect record. So I would like to copy this. For that one, we need to write the business logic. Now requirement 3. Once the lead record has been copied into the prospect record, prospect object, then I want to send the email notification to the lead owner, nothing but lead person. Whatever the email ID is available inside is a lead record field. So now in that email field, whatever the email ID is there, to that email ID, I want to send the email notification. This is the third requirement. Now, so in this case, how can we write this trigger? In the last session, we have discussed about. In the last session, we have discussed about this functionality. Now, so now here in this case, for that one, we are creating a trigger on that lead object here. Lead trigger on lead object. So what is the events over here? We are going to write it. Before inserting the record, we need to validate this information so that I'm firing the trigger on before insert event. I'm firing the trigger on before insert event. Second one. Now, once the lead record has been inserted successfully, I want to copy this lead record information to the prospect so that after insertion of the lead record, I would like to copy this data into my prospect. For that one, I'm writing one more event here after insert. Next, after that here, I would like to send the email notification. When once the lead record has been copied into the prospect, that means after insertion of the lead, once the lead has been copied into the prospect, then I want to send the email notification to that lead person. For that reason, we are going to be writing that piece of code that is also firing on after insert only here. These two are firing after insert. Now validations have to be get fired when before insert and then before update. So I would like to find the validations. Nothing but I want to make sure that email field, phone field, and the annual revenue field should be mandatory in both the cases, before insert and before update, because validations have to be done in both the cases. So these are the events that I have written inside my trigger. So my trigger will be getting fired on before insert, before update, and then after insert. Now tell me in this case here, now how can we segregate this piece of code? How can we segregate this piece of code? That means what? This piece of code I want to execute on before insert and then before update. This piece of code I want to execute on after insert. Then how can we segregate this piece of code? Now how can we write this piece of code? Now let me explain. Now I would like to find this code. Based on these respective events, I would like to find this code. Then how can we do that? Now let's see practically in this case. In this case, we are going to preparing the trigger. In this case, we have to prepare the trigger. Trigger, lead trigger, and lead. What are the events are there on which we would like to verify the trigger? Okay, before insert, before update, and then after insert. These are the three events on which I would like to find the trigger. Before insert, before update, after insert. These are the three events on which I would like to fire the trigger. Before inserting the record, what I need to do? I need to do the validations. How do you know trigger has been fired because of before insert or not? We need to verify. What is the current context of the trigger? We need to identify. Trigger dot is before. Okay, trigger dot is before, and trigger dot is insert. That means if the trigger has been fired because of before insert event. Okay, before insert, nothing but if the trigger has been fired because of insert operation or not, and that too it is about to perform the operation. That means is before. Then I would like to write the validation. Validation code. Like the similar way. The same validation code I want to file when during that before update also. I'm very this. If trigger dot is update and trigger dot is before update. Same code. Write the validation code. I'm writing this validation code. The next one. So now after insert, that means once a record has been inserted successfully, I would like to perform some operation. What are those? Copy that record into the prospect object and send the email notification to that lead person's email ID. Now for that one, I'm writing one more context. If trigger dot is after and trigger dot is inserted. That means once the lead record has been inserted, I want to write the code to copy the lead into prospect. And then write the code to send the email alert. In order to send the email alert, whatever the piece of code is required, write that piece of code. This is the way. So now we are going to be writing this piece of code over here. That means what? Whenever if you are going to be performing the operations based on the multiple events, don't prepare a separate trigger for each and every event. Write only one trigger for the entire object. For the entire object, use only one trigger. So why? Because if I'm writing multiple triggers on the same event, then which trigger will fire execute first, which trigger will execute next, we don't know. In the last session also we have discussed. So to avoid such kind of problems here, we are preparing only one trigger for an object, and then we are going to be writing the business logic. We are writing this business logic, okay, in a specific order, whatever the way that we want to execute that. That facility will be available to you. Now, so in this case, in order to know, okay, instead of writing that separate triggers for each and every event on the same object, we are going to be writing only one trigger for an entire object. So all the events we can able to write within a single trigger. In this case, whenever if you are writing this entire code related to all the events within the single trigger, to segregate that piece of code, to indicate this piece of code has to be executed on before insert event, this piece of code has to be executed on before update event, this piece of code has to be executed on after insert event, we are going to be using the help of trigger context variables. By using trigger context variables, we can able to identify what is the current event, what is the current context of the trigger, what is the current status of the trigger. Based on that, we can execute the respective business logic. Now, in this case, to identify that current status of the trigger, we are using trigger context variables, like as is before, is after, and then is insert, is update, is delete, is undelete, is executing, size, operation type. These are the various trigger context variables that we are using to identify the current status of the trigger. Now, In this case, if the trigger has been fired because of before insert event, then I'm identifying. If trigger dot is before, that means trigger is about to perform the operation. Then what is that operation? If it is insert operation or not, that means if it is before insert, it is about to perform the insert operation. Then at that time, please execute this business logic. That means do the validation. So now is update and is before. That means trigger is about to update that record. Trigger is about to update the record. It is not yet updated. Trigger is about to update the record. At that time, please execute this business logic. After insert, that means if the trigger has done with the insertion of the record. So once the record has been inserted successfully, then send the email notification or perform some different operation. At that time, you can able to write that code inside this particular block. So that in order to segregate that code block based on the events, we are using trigger context variables. Now, in this case here, now let me explain. Here one more small optimization. In this case, when you observe this one, now before insert also, before update also, we are doing the same validation. Here also I'm doing the validation code. Here also I'm doing the validation. That means what duplication code is available, right? Same code is available in two places. Okay, same code is available in two places. So now in this case, do we have any chance to optimize this one? Do we have any chance to make this code generic, nothing but only once? Yes, there is a possibility. What needs to be done? Instead of having these two conditions separately, we can able to club into a single condition. We can club into a single condition. Then how can we club into a single condition? Now let me show you in this case. Now, in this case, this is first condition. Before insert also, I want to execute the same validations code. After insert also, before update also, I want to execute same validation code. For that one, I'm going to be adding these two conditions up. Now, up to this part is one or. That means either before insert or before update. Okay, before update. Before insert or before update. Then execute this validation code. That means here we can write the code only once so that we can able to remove this particular part. So we can make the code optimized. Now in this case, what happened? Now the same validations code I want to execute when either before insert or before update. Now tell me here, do we have anything to optimize still? Yes. What is that? For example, assume that we are having a small expression as part of mathematics. Assume that I'm having some 2 into 3 plus 2 into 7. These are the two expressions are available here. Then what we can do, how to optimize? In these two expressions, 2 is common. Here also I'm multiplying that 3 with the 2. Here also multiplying the 7 with the 2. So we can make it segregate. Like as 2 into 3 plus 7. 3 plus 7. So that means 2 into 10, that is 20. Here also the same result, like as 6 and then 14. You will be having 20, here also the same. 2 into 10, that is 50. Same result is available. Like the similar way, here also we are doing the same. Here also before is available, here also is before is available. So then what we can do? We can able to make it segregate. In this case, here I'm going to be removing this part. In this case, I'm removing this one. If trigger dot is insert or trigger dot is update. Trigger dot is update and trigger dot is before. That's it. That means what we are optimizing that. That means trigger dot is insert or trigger dot is update. That means either it may be insert or update and before. That means before insert or before update. Then please execute this business logic. Like this here, we need to optimize the conditions. Upon preparing those conditions, always you have to write that optimized format. Either it may be before insert or before update. I would like to do the validation, and for the after insert, I would like to execute this business logic over here. Now, so in this case, whenever if you want to identify the current context of the triggers, we are going to be using this trigger context variables. By using this trigger context variables, you can able to execute this functionality so well. Okay. Now, these are the various context variables are available as part of trigger. Now, the next context variable trigger dot old map, trigger dot new map. Okay, now let me explain. First of all, let me go with this. Trigger dot new. Trigger dot new. So what is this trigger dot new context variable? What is it? What exactly the trigger dot new context variable? Now let me explain practically in this case. So now in the previous session, you know the trigger execution life cycle. You know the trigger execution life cycle over here. A general scenario we have discussed. A general scenario we have discussed in the previous session. Trigger execution life cycle already we have discussed. Whenever you are going to be inserting the records inside that object, the trigger will fire automatically. Whenever you are inserting the records, the trigger will be firing automatically. Here it is going to be validating the data by placing in a separate place over there. That is called as the security counter, like this. Nothing but it is called as magic tables. Now, let me explain here what will happen in this case as part of trigger context variables. For example, assume that I have an object. I have an object. This is my account object over here. In my account object, I'm having few fields like the ID field, name field, rating field, industry field, and the phone field. These are the fields are available. These are the fields are there inside my account object. In my account object, I'm having the various fields like the ID field, name field, rating, industry, and then we are having the phone. These are the various fields are available inside my account object. Now, in my account object, I'm having this ID field, name, rating, industry, and the phone fields. These are the various fields are available inside my account object. Now my requirement is whenever I'm creating a new record inside my account object, I want to make sure industry field and phone field should be required. Okay. My requirement is I want to make sure industry field value and then phone field value should be mandatory for each and every record. Whenever you are inserting a new record inside my account object, compulsorily that record should have the industry value and phone value. Without those two values, I don't want to accept the account record. Then, how can we do that? How can we make sure the industry value and the phone value should be mandatory inside my account card? Now let's see practically in this case. Now, for that one, I am going to be creating a trigger. Okay, I'm going to be creating a trigger on my account object. Okay, I would like to create a trigger on my account object. I would like to create a trigger, okay, on my account object. Now I'm preparing a trigger. I'm preparing a trigger on my account object. This is the trigger I would like to prepare. This is the trigger I would like to prepare. I'm preparing a trigger on my account object, which will be getting filed. When you would like to validate this information before insert. So I would like to fire my trigger on before insert event. Before inserting a new record inside my object, I would like to fire the trigger. I'm giving that event name as before insert. Before insert of that account record, I would like to fire my trigger. Before inserting an account record inside my account object, I would like to fire this trigger. So what is the use of this trigger? I would like to validate. What you would like to validate? I would like to validate that whether in this account record do we have the industry field value, phone field values available. Now in this case, what needs to be done? I need to write some business logic, right? Yes, I need to write some conditions, whether industry field value is not null or not, phone field value is not null or not. For that one, I'm writing some business logic over here. I'm preparing some business logic over here. I'm writing some business logic. I'm writing some business logic over here. Write the business logic. Write the business logic to make sure that phone field, industry field should be mandatory. In order to make sure that okay, phone field and the industry field mandatory, I'm writing some business logic. This business logic has been attached to my trigger. This business logic has been attached to my trigger. Now this is my setup. I'm ready with my setup in front of my account object. That means this is my shopping mall. This is my security personnel. They are ready. So now they're having some business logic also in order to validate the data here. So now my setup is ready. Whenever if any record is going to be inserting into the object, compulsorily record has to pass through the trigger itself. No chance to escape. Even though you may be creating the record through user interface, or through programming also, through data loader also, through integration also, you can use any way, compulsorily it has to come to the object. But in front of the object, there is a security person sitting over there, that is trigger. Now today I'm inserting a record over here. Now I'm inserting the record. This is the record which I'm trying to insert. In this record, I'm passing the name of the account record, rating value, industry, and the phone number. These are the values which I'm supplying over here. You may pass either one record or you may pass the multiple records also, whatever it might be. I'm inserting the record. I'm creating a record. Some Ram Kumar. Rating value I'm indicating like as industry I'm indicating banking, phone number somewhere. Some value here. Now I'm trying to be inserting the record. Okay, I'm trying to be inserting the record over here. This is the record which I'm trying to be inserting into my object. Whenever we are trying to be inserting this record into this object, so compulsorily it has to pass through the trigger itself. Okay, it has to pass through the trigger. But what the trigger will do, trigger is not going to be inserting the record directly inside the object over here. It is moving this record to a temporary place here. Yesterday we have discussed that in the previous session. Whenever you are trying to be entering into the shopping mall, directly the security person won't allow you to enter into the shopping mall. There is a security counter is available. So please go to the security counter. They will cross check you with some metal detectors or by using some equipment or by using manual check also. If you have any unwanted items like pistols, bombs, bags, knives, all these things, they won't allow you to enter into the shopping mall. If you don't have these kind of unwanted items, directly they will allow you to enter into the shopping mall. Like the similar way, they're moving you to a temporary place that is called as magic table. So now in this case, like the similar way here also, Salesforce is going to be moving this record into a temporary place. It is moving this record into a temporary place. To hold these records, okay, it is going to be allocating some temporary place over here. This is the temporary memory which is going to be reserving by Salesforce. It is maintaining a temporary memory. It is maintaining a temporary memory. In this temporary memory, the record will be getting hold. Now this temporary memory generally called as magic table in databases. But in Salesforce here we are going to be using collection because here we are holding multiple records. It may be one record, it may be multiple records. Why? Because this right now I'm inserting only one record. Sometimes I'm inserting 10 records also through Apex programming in one shot. So at that time, those records also will be coming into this place over. In this case, to hold this record, it is going to be using a context variable that is called as trigger.new. Trigger.new is what? Trigger.new is nothing but a context variable. Trigger.new is nothing but a context variable. So what it contains, whatever the records that you are trying to insert, okay, whatever the records you are trying to insert, those records will be placing inside this temporary memory over here. So now here we are going to be collecting these records. Whatever the records you are trying to insert, those records are going to move into the temporary place. When you try to insert this record into the trigger is going to moving this record into the temporary place. Trigger is going to moving this record into a temporary place. Whatever the record you are trying to insert, now the trigger is going to moving this record into temporary place. This will move this record into the temporary place. In this temporary place, what will happen? Now, whatever the business logic that were written, the business logic will be getting applied on these records. Whatever the business logic that were written, now this business logic will be getting applied on these records over here. It will apply the business logic on the records. Whatever the records you have prepared, on these records, it is going to be applying the business logic. Now, it will apply the business logic on these records. Apply the business logic. It will apply the business logic. Whatever the business logic is required, the business logic will be getting applied on this particular records over. It will apply the business logic. Once the business logic has been getting applied, that means once the validations has been done, if the records are satisfying with the condition, then only your record will be accepting into your object. Once the records are meeting this criteria, if the records are validating successfully, if the fields are having the respective values, then only it is going to be accepting the record into your object over here. It will apply the business logic on this record. Once the business logic has been getting applied, once the validations has been successful, then only record will be accepting into your object. That means record will be inserted. If the validations has been failed, it is going to be cancelling the record. That means operation will be getting cancelled. This is the functionality. If the operation is successful, that means validation success. If the validation is successful, then at that time, it is going to be inserting this record into the object. Suppose if the validation is failed, if the validation fails, if the validation has been failed, then it is going to be cancelling this record. It will cancel the operation. It will cancel the operation. Now, In this case, what happened? Whenever you are trying to be inserting the records, what are the new records I'm trying to insert? Okay, what are the new records I'm trying to insert? It may be one record, it may be multiple records also. It may be one record, it may be multiple records also. Suppose, for example, I'm inserting one more record also over here. I'm inserting one more record also. Now, I'm giving some different values over here. Now, I'm giving that name as Suresh. Phone number I'm indicating for that. Now, in this case, what happened? Both the records will be coming into your collection. That means multiple records I'm trying to insert here. So at that time, multiple records are also going to be placing in this location. So to hold this multiple records, it is going to be using a collection. What is that collection name? Trigger.new. Trigger.new is what? Trigger.new is the collection which is holding the current context records. Current context means what? What are the records you are trying to be inserting newly? Those records are going to be placing inside that the collection that is called as trigger.new. What type of collection it is? It is a list collection. Okay, it is a list collection which holds the current context records in the list format, where all the records which you are trying to insert in newly, those records are available. Now we need to iterate that collection from starting to ending, apply the business logic to do the validations. If all the records have been successfully validated, then only records will be accepting into your object. If any of the validation has been failed, your entire operation will be getting cancelled. This is the internal operation of internal execution of that trigger. This is the functionality of the trigger.new context variable. So trigger.new is the context variable which contains the current context records. That means current context means what? What are the records you are trying to be inserting newly? Those records will be placing inside that trigger.new in the form of list collection. In the form of list collection. It is a list collection. Trigger.new is a list collection which holds the current context records in the list format, so that we can collect all those records. We can able to iterate that collection from starting to ending, apply the business logic on that, and then we can able to validate the data. This is the internal execution of trigger.new. Okay. So in this case, when you go to the databases, it is using magic tables. So for that one here, for Salesforce, it is using this trigger.new context variables, which will be holding those records. Now, let me place this code. Trigger.new, which is a listicle list of yes object data. No. Trigger.new is a list collection or is a context variable which contains the current context records in the form of a list collection. In the form of a list collection. That is, all the newly inserting records will get placed inside the trigger.new for the validations. The syntax is trigger.new, which will be holding that syntax is list of with subject data. That may be account record, that may be contact record, that may be lead records, or whatever it may be, anything. Depends upon that object. So this is the way we are going to be using trigger.new context variable inside your Apex programming. Trigger.new is a context variable which contains the current context record. That means whatever the records you are trying to insert newly, those records are going to be placing inside the trigger.new context variable for the validation. So once the records are available inside the trigger.new, and then we can able to iterate this collection from starting to ending, and then we can able to do the validations on each and every record one by one based on your application requirement. So next, we have 3 more context variables are there. We'll see in tomorrow's session. In tomorrow's session, we'll see 3 more trigger context variables. And then after that, we are having the types of triggers, trigger bulkifications we'll see, and then we'll see the concept of trigger practical part. As of now, we are discussing purely theoretical, nothing but the background process of triggers. If we know this one, then only we can able to write the trigger code. So once it is done, and then we'll see that how to write the triggers. We'll see the multiple practical examples with the complex use cases also we'll see practically, and then we'll see the remaining functionalities of triggers as well.